Good morning and welcome to the Food Standards Agency board meeting. My name is Ruth Hussey, I'm the interim chair. We'll go straight into the agenda today, and first of all we have no apologies, and I'd like to give notice that if my internet connection for any reason fails during the meeting, Margaret Gilmore will take over as chair for that period of the meeting. I'd also like to welcome Stephen Pollock, who is Interim Director of Strategy, Legal, Communications and Governance. Welcome, Stephen. Do any board members have any conflicts of interest to declare? I can't see any, so we'll go on to, do any board members have any items of any other business they would wish to raise? No? Okay, I would like to give notice of any other items of business. First of all, the board meeting dates for 2022, and also, sadly, I will be saying a few words to thank David Brooks, who is attending his last board meeting and will finish his term of office at the end of the month. So we'll go straight on to questions, and Justin Everard, the Acting Director of Communications, will read out the questions, please.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. And good morning, everybody. We have 4 questioners today and a total of 8 questions. The first question comes from Angeline Wolfe of mycompliancepeople.com. She is the co-founder of My Compliance People, and My Compliance People is a firm of food safety consultants. As background, she says that there's now a 50% backlog in local authority food hygiene inspections, and environmental health departments are continuing to have their limited resources directed to help manage the COVID pandemic challenge. She says inevitably there will be an ongoing shortfall of inspections and a corresponding risk to public health. There's a suggestion that the food hygiene rating scheme scores may be reset to take the pressure off local authorities, and she says that this could result in some food businesses not being inspected for up to 5 years. She's got 3 questions. Question 1. Has the FSA requested any financial assistance from the Treasury to support local authorities taking on additional contract inspectors? Question 2. Is the FSA concerned about the erosion of consumer confidence in FHRS? And question 3, does the FSA believe this situation could impact timescales associated with the introduction of legislation to require compulsory display of FHRS stickers in England? The second questioner is Mike Wilson. Mike is Managing Director of Cascade Associates, also a firm of food safety consultants. And he says there's clear evidence that local authorities don't have the resource required to keep up with the FHRS scheduled inspections. He says the failure to carry out the scheduled FHRS inspections may also undermine or delay the introduction of compulsory posting in England and damage the reputation of FHRS in the mind of the consumers. His question is, could the FSA board indicate a timescale for a decision on allowing accredited consultancies to carry out low-risk inspections to enable local authorities to focus increasingly on high-risk sites? The third questioner is Paul Hisco. He is founding and managing director of scoresonthedoors.org.uk. And his question is about remote inspection technology, which he says is very well established, and many thousands of inspections have been undertaken, including on certified food inspection schemes. He cites a paper from the Business Committee on 4th of December 2020, where it was stated that remote assessment could be used to determine the need for an on-site visit to deal with public health risks. He says that the paper indicated an assessment to review the possibility of use by local authorities of using remote inspections to register official FHRS scores will be completed by mid-February 2021. Paul has got 2 questions. 1, assuming the assessment is now complete, in what timescales is a decision expected to be made to extend the use of remote assessments from merely assessing the need for a physical inspection to, perhaps in some low-risk cases, he says, allowing for full awarding of the official FHRS rating? And his second question, in the light of the global pandemic, might a more urgent temporary easing on this matter have perhaps helped avoid the huge backlog now faced by local authorities, which has led to the need for a reset? Must LAs continue to wait for the final verdict, or might the FSA grant some form of temporary easement while the finer details of policy, are still under consideration? Our final questioner today is Adrian Shepherd. Adrian is Operations Manager of Body and Mind Botanicals. Body and Mind Botanicals is a CBD producer, and he's got two questions. Question one, we've been given exemption under Article 4 for our hemp tea. Will there be an official document for this? And his second question is, when will the CBD testing standard be ready to use? And those are the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Justin, for those. And I'm sure that officials will prepare the responses to those questions and indeed address them where appropriate, either during today's board meeting or indeed tomorrow's business committee. But thank you for those questions. Can we move to the minutes of the board meeting on the 2nd of December? Are board members willing to accept these as an accurate record of the meeting? I don't hear any objections. We'll accept those, thank you. And then any comments on the actions arising from the meeting? Got Colm?
Sorry, Chair, I was having difficulty raising my hand. It's just a very small point in relation to 512 on the minutes. It's just for accuracy. Maria Jennings, in the middle of the paragraph, said that FSA had participated in DEFRA-led industry. It's actually DERA-led industry events rather than DEFRA, so they weren't led in Northern Ireland by DERA.
Okay.
Just for accuracy.
Thank you for that correction. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on then to the Chair's report to the board. Give you my report. And my engagements since I took over as interim chair from the 1st of February have been published on our website. And on the 2nd of February, along with Emily, I attended a discussion with the Department of Health and Social Care Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Prevention, Public Health and Primary Care, Joe Churchill, and the DEFRA Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Farming, Fisheries and Food, Victoria Prentice, where we discussed COVID-19 and vaccination of food key workers. On the 2nd of March, I had an introductory meeting with Christine Middlemiss, the UK Chief Veterinary Officer. And later today, again along with Emily, I'm due to attend a catch-up with Andrew Opie, Director of Food and Sustainability at the British Retail Consortium, and other representatives from the food industry. Further ahead, I'm looking forward to addressing the Food Standards Agency's Food Hypersensitivity Symposium, which is on 24th of March. I've also been busy this month with a campaign to recruit new FSA board members. Interviews concluded yesterday, and our recommended candidates will now go forward to ministers for their agreements. So all going well, we should be joined by the time of our June board with our new starters. And of course, hopefully a new chair. The interviews for the chair have concluded, and similarly, agreement from ministers is being sought for the chosen candidate who will appear before the Health and Social Care Select Committee in April. Any comments or questions? Thank you. So we'll now turn to the Chief Executive's report, and over to Emily.
Thank you, Ruth. Good morning, everybody. So I'm conscious there's quite a lot in my written report, and I don't want to recount it to all of you here. But I do want to start by saying a big thank you to everyone in the organisation for all of the work that was done to prepare for the end of the transition period whilst COVID was going on with additional lockdowns happening in January. What we managed to deliver, I think you'll see in the EU exit paper, which is being discussed later today, was substantial. We hit our milestones, we thought a lot of things through, and then we were ready for the unexpected that came afterwards. So I'm extremely pleased with how we did. And as I said, big thank you to everyone there. The report does cover a range of issues. So it covers 2 ongoing outbreaks of Salmonella enteritidis, the issue of Kobani and direct supply of meat to consumers from abattoirs during the Eid al-Adha festival, our data science and strategic surveillance work, our allergies communications campaign that's ongoing at the moment. It mentions the Trade and Agriculture Commission too. But there were just two issues I wanted to draw out for the board this morning. The first is about our regulated products work, and particularly CBD applications, so applications relating to products that have cannabidiol in. You'll recall that a year ago we set a deadline to the CBD industry and said that only those products where we have received validated applications can remain on the market in England and Wales after the 1st of April. We want to bring the CBD industry into compliance with food law, and we want to make sure we protect consumers. And we think this is a proportionate approach. We've given the sector over a year to get their applications in, and I just want to re-emphasise the fact that the deadline is coming and those applications do need to be in and validated. And then the second area I wanted to draw out was the gene editing consultation that DEFRA are in the middle of at the moment. So just to say that the FSA supports the consultation and the fact that consumers and other stakeholders can have their say on this question. And we have been encouraging people to take part in the consultation through our media channels, as well as the work that DEFRA have been doing. As you'll know, there are no gene edited products currently authorised in the UK. And now and in the future, any genetically modified or gene edited product must go through the appropriate regulatory process before being placed on the market. If, as the consultation proposes, gene edited products were to be removed from the GMO framework, then gene edited foods could be captured instead by the novel foods framework, which is our framework where just with CBD, applications need to be made to get those products to have a safety assessment and to be authorised. So in the case of gene edited feed, however, products would fall under the animal feed framework, so not under the novel food framework. But we consider that these may not be the most suitable regulatory frameworks, and the FSA is keen to explore appropriate future options. In doing that, we feel it incredibly important to continue to represent consumer interests. We will do this through the risk analysis process that the board has agreed, where a range of factors can be taken into account in making our regulatory recommendation on particular products. And we're also rather conscious that the consultation is limited to England, and there may be implications for other nations given the devolved nature of food and feed safety and applicability of EU law in Northern Ireland. So I was just aware that the board needed to have that information in front of it. That's all I was going to say, Ruth, by way of introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. I'd like to add my comments on the FSA role in the regulation of genetic technologies, but first I'd like to ask our Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Robin May, to say a few words about what the technologies involve.
Thank you very much, Ruth, and good morning all. Yes, I'll do my best in the next 1 or 2 minutes just to quickly summarise where we're at with that. So I hope the board and those listening will indulge me if I do that with a little bit of analogy. So people, I think, will be familiar with the context of genetic modification, generally, which has been a technology has been around for many decades. Genome editing is a relatively recent and more precision-based technology that allows manipulation of genomes. And it has huge potential, huge applications across food, but also medicines, healthcare, all sorts of approaches. And I think perhaps the easiest way to think of this is if we take that analogy that's often used of a genome being an instruction book to build an organism. So you have a book that builds your tomato plant or your human or whatever. And it's written in letters like a normal book. Those letters in the case of a genome are written in DNA letters or base pairs. And they specify how you create your organism, so how it grows, how it fruits in the case of a plant, etc., etc. So you can imagine a book that is written in letters. Those letters are formed into words and sentences, and together they specify how the organism is built. Up until fairly recently, if we wanted to change that instruction book, you've had to change large chunks of text at a time. So, for instance, board members and those listening in might be familiar with some examples from food related. So perhaps one of the most recent is a genetically modified salmon that has been approved by the FDA in the United States. And in that case, the salmon grows much faster than the original salmon. And what has happened there is that people have taken a large chunk of the DNA of that salmon and replaced it with chunks of DNA from other fish species, and different salmon species, and a species that's not salmon at all, to create a salmon that grows much faster. If you like, they've taken several pages of the book and replaced it with a different set of pages. The difference with genome editing as a technology is it allows you, rather than to replace whole pages or chunks of the book, to replace even single letters and make tiny tweaks. And you might imagine that those tiny tweaks very often have no impact in terms of the context of the book, but a very precision edit could change the meaning. So if you think about, I don't know, a word like tall, maybe you have a word in your instruction book that says make a tall plant, you could change 2 letters and make that read make a small plant instead. So with relatively precise edits, you can make these tiny changes. And that really is the power of genome editing, to come in and make a very precise, very accurately determined small change. And the reason, I guess, behind the public consultation is that the nature of those changes really are extraordinarily similar to what happens through normal evolutionary processes. So all the time, organisms are recombining, changing their DNA, introducing those type of small changes. So if you imagine perhaps taking 2 very similar books, a first edition and a second edition book, you mix them together and you create a new hybrid book. It looks very, very similar to both of those original books, but there are a small number of letters changed. That's what evolution is doing all the time. Traditional breeders do this in their plant or their animal species. They look at the variation of books that are created. They pick the ones with the winning characteristics. But if you think about what's happened there, is you've changed a large number of letters. There may only be one that you want, and so you now have to back cross. You have to breed that product again and again and again to try and pin down the change you want. The advantage of genome editing is you can go in and you can make only the change you want and not all these other letter changes that happen when you mix the books together. And so it's a kind of precision technology that offers opportunities in terms of changing all sorts of characteristics of plants and animals. And the current consultation is designed to ask whether people feel that this very precise technology is distinct from traditional genetic modification strategies, because the precision and the nature of the change is one that can be created, and indeed is created very often, by natural evolutionary processes. So that's, I hope, a kind of whistle stop of genome editing. Very happy to take questions from the board or others if there are issues around that. The last thing to say, as Emily just mentioned, is of course, regardless of what happens with the genome technology itself, a novel product that has been created would still normally go through the novel foods authorization regime that we have. The Advisory Committee on Novel Foods and Processes would consider a product that has been created in this way and look at it in the light of the product that is created in front of them on that basis, regardless of what technology has led to that product in the first place. So there is indeed a framework there that sits separately from the genome technology that has gone before it. I hope that's helpful, Chair. I'm very happy to take questions from Arnie.
Thank you very much, Robin. I think this technology is, of course, a matter of great interest to both consumers and industry. And that's why I'd like to take this opportunity to be clear about the FSA's role and how we're approaching this issue. Whilst the outcome of the consultation will be dependent on the decision of DEFRA Secretary of State, any intention to remove gene editing technologies from the definition of genetically modified organisms will, as been outlined, impact on the FSA's regulatory responsibilities. So the FSA has a strong interest in ensuring that, depending on the consultation outcome, the future regulatory framework is fit for purpose and will meet broader government objectives of protecting consumers, encouraging innovation, and supporting international trade and the UK internal market. So I therefore intend to write to the DEFRA Secretary of State, George Eustice, emphasising the need for appropriate and consistent regulatory oversight appropriate to these new technologies, so as to underpin confidence in their use, as well as the importance of clear information to the consumer. My predecessor, Heather Hancock, wrote to ministers outlining similar points in advance of the DEFRA consultation. And I think it's important that we ensure that the FSA's role and views are made clear as the consultation comes to a close. So I'd like to invite any brief comments from board members on this approach. And I've got several hands up, so I will go to Margaret Gilmore first.
Thanks, Ruth. On this particular issue, I've got a couple of other questions for Emily on different issues, but I'll park those. On this one, it was really good getting Robin's input there. I think there's so much genome editing research going on in so many different fields, as he mentioned, and in a lot of them, the UK is a leader. So I think it's important for us to support research where there is research going on as much as we can, and then as far as food goes and genome edited food, the public will just want to know that everything we do, we regulate, is safe. But I think it's very easy, as he pointed out, to muddle genome editing and genetically modified foods. So getting that clear message across is going to become increasingly important. And because it's complicated, it's not something that you can just do one time, as Robin has done. He's going to have to do it again and again and again. So I think that message is important, the comms side of that. And then secondly, I think at some point, discussions have to be had about recognising food that may be safe, but food that may be made using techniques that the public may not like.
Margaret, for those comments, and I'll come back to you because I think you've got some other points you want to raise. So we take some more comments on this issue. I think I've got Colm and Timothy.
Sure, thank you. And I thought Robin's analogy was really useful, you know, in explaining this. What it doesn't change, of course, is that it's still a level of genomic modification, but in a much more precision-based way. And I think it is really important in terms of your engagement, Chair, with the DEFRA Secretary of State, and as much dialogue as we can have as possible with the decision makers in government on this, so that they fully understand the role that the FSA must play in all of this. Because while I completely understand the difference between genome editing and GMO, they are very closely related, and there will be issues. The other issue that we need to be mindful of, and I am comforted by the risk analysis process that we have worked our way through over the past 12 or 18 months, and I think we're in a good place to take this sort of stuff forward. Obviously, there will be the issue from a Northern Ireland perspective, because we work under a slightly different set of regulations now, as still part of the EU single market. So really keen to understand how we manage that as we move forward towards the outset of this, or the close of this consultation.
Tim?
Thanks, and thank you very much to Robin for setting out some of the sort of technology in his analogy. I guess for us as the food safety, we need to be thinking about where there are also risks as well as benefits. Our concern is principally around food and feed and human health. And I think that whilst this technology is a great step forward and will have many, many benefits, it is quite important to understand that it's still relatively in its infancy. And there is still research and development going on in terms of its fidelity. And we ought to be able to understand whether the specificity is sufficient that it will support our confidence in the use of modification that leads to either use within animals or gets into the human food chain. And so I'd like to see, I think, in that conversation, a balance with some of those risks presented from a scientific basis so that we can better understand what's before us as a food standards agency. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Absolutely understand those comments. And Emily, do you want to comment any further? I'll come back to Rick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ruth. I just wanted to make it really clear, because I'm conscious that we're we've been talking about gene editing as a technology that has potential, but I want to be incredibly clear that the FSA has not yet done a safety assessment of this technology. So we are not yet able to comment authoritatively on the safety of this for consumers. And that is exactly what the risk assessment process that I was describing is intended to achieve. In addition to assessing the safety aspects, that process is designed to consider what we call other legitimate factors. So it's not just about what happens when a human ingests this. There are other legitimate factors that risk assessment considers, which may be effect on the environment and so on. So I just want to be really, really clear that whilst we're saying that we're up for having the gene editing process regulated outside of that GM foods exemption, we still think there needs to be a safety assessment, and that safety assessment has not yet happened and would need to happen before gene edited food entered the diet of the UK.
Thank you, Emily, for that clarification. Rick, you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Ruth. I was just going to come back on some of the comments that were made, because I think the board would be really interested to know some of the stuff we're doing. We've talked a lot in the discussion about the views of consumers, and it was just to say that we are doing a piece of work examining consumer interest in this area. We do this with a lot of new technologies, but certainly given the current debate, it's really valid to be doing this now. And hopefully this piece of research is in field at the moment, and we would hope to have a report at some point in the near future. The one thing I would just add is that lots of people talked about the difference between GM and gene editing and genome editing as two different technologies. And I think some of the things we do know is that there is a lack of understanding about those two different technologies, and people, because GM as a technology has been around for a lot longer, people are more familiar, but there is still this lack of knowledge amongst consumers around gene editing. So that would definitely be something that would have to be addressed. And also my final comment would just be say that, again, as always, we talk about the consumer as a one homogenous thing. It's not. It's very complicated. There are many publics, there are many consumers, different types and different views, and in fact their views vary with age. What is the technology? They will see different GE crops, for example, or genetically modified crops in different ways. So, for example, a perception of whether you modify a crop versus an animal, for example, is seen as something where they have different views. So again, it's a complex issue, but we're trying to get some of the data that underpins it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rick. Robin, you've got your hand to comment. Do you want to come back in?
Just very briefly, thank you, Ruth. I just thought I'd pick up quickly on Tim's point, which of course, I mean, and Emily's subsequent point about the GE. I mean, absolutely, like any other technology, of course, you can use genome editing to achieve all sorts of different things, just as with traditional breeding. So, you know, conceptually, it would be possible to create a product that was much more risky with genome editing, just as traditional breeding could create a product that was more risky. And I think it's really important that we will look in due course both at the technology as a whole, but also the specific applications for an individual product, because that, you know, those are sort of two separate things. I just wanted to make that point clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin. That's helpful. I've no doubt this is an issue we'll be coming back to over the next few months. Now, Margaret, you said you had some other points to raise on Emily's paper. Would you like to do that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of ones. It was a fascinating paper, Emily, and as you say, incredibly full. Do we have any idea of what percentage of cannabidiol products may be out on the shelves and still are not going to be licensed on time? Is that going to be quite an issue? And the second one is that in the light of the latest recalls, you were talking about breaded chicken. Are the risks different if the chicken is breaded, or is it are they the same as any other type of chicken?
I've got David and Mark who want to comment. So I take those comments and then perhaps you could respond, Emily. So David first and then Mark.
4 comments for me, 2 of which build on what Margaret has just said. Turning to CBD, I mean, it's very encouraging to see such a huge number of applications coming in from the industry and their support of this new process. Have we got the capacity to deal with that number of applications over the coming months so that people do get feedback quickly, and obviously to ensure that consumer safety remains paramount? And how will we coordinate enforcement after the 1st of April? Clearly, there are lots of trading standards and environmental services people that will be looking locally, but we've got online sales, we've got overseas sales in the UK, and again, to protect consumer interests, but also to be fair to all of those CBD people who have made their applications, we probably need to have quite a firm line on enforcement, and that might need some coordination rather than just all of our local authorities acting independently. Second point relates to the Salmonella case. We've had, I think, 3 waves of recalls now. So are we comfortable that we've got our arms around that issue? And are there any additional steps that are being put in place, such as considering positive release for those products before they're allowed to be brought into the UK? There have been potentially a number of deaths related to this, and it's probably one of our more serious food outbreaks that we've seen now. The 2 other points and this relates back as much to the questions we saw earlier as well. What plans do we have in place to work with local authorities so that they can catch up on their audit backlog? I know we're trying to get some easements on qualifications, etc., but the backlog is significant. We've seen many stories as well about many new businesses popping up, particularly home businesses. So not only is the backlog is almost attacking from 2 angles, isn't it? One of existing businesses, but also new businesses appearing. So what is the plan there so that consumers can retain their confidence in FHRS in particular? And finally, just on the Trade and Agriculture Commission, I thought is a really good report, actually, nice and comprehensive, and welcome that the work they've done. I guess there's several references in there to consumer interests and food standards needing to be protected. And I just wondered whether, as the FSA, we were going to respond to that report and remind the Commission and the relevant government departments that those sit within our remit, and we are delighted to work with them on ensuring that protection continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave, for those comprehensive questions. Mark, do you want to add yours to that? And then I'll come to Rebecca to answer some of them, and then Emily and perhaps Maria as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Many of the points I was going to make, actually, David already made around enforcement relating to CBD. The only one issue I would add to everything that David made is, are we confident that there is an adequately robust capacity for scientific testing of these products to support enforcement authorities when they get involved in that enforcement thing? My other question related to a paragraph in your report, Emily, around changing codes for qualifications. You refer to in that the urgent need for local authorities to recruit, train and deploy extra officers. Just wondered if you had any thoughts on how that urgent need is going to be funded, particularly at the front end for local authorities.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Rebecca, do you want to pick up some of those points first?
Yeah, I can. I can talk a little bit about CBD. So, and forgive me if I've tried to capture all the questions, but do prompt me if I haven't caught them all. Mary, you were asking about the number of products that might be authorised eventually, and as we know, one of the reasons we were so keen to be clear about our regulatory approach is that there are a very large number of unregulated products out there at the moment. It's impossible to say how many of those will ultimately pass forward to validation, but as Dave has said, it is very encouraging that we have had such a large number. of submissions through to our regulated products process. As I think the report makes clear, not all of those will be suitable to go through now to full validation. This is a young industry, and we are very much engaging with them to support companies to meet the requirements and to be able to come forward with the evidence that's required. Some of them won't be able to do so, but we are encouraged. And yes, Dave, we have thought carefully about the resources in place. We have a system in place where we can surge additional resources into parts of the risk analysis process to respond to increases in demand. And obviously, the CBD authorization process is something that we've been planning for now for a number of months. And so far, we're able to keep up with the volume of inquiries that we've got, although it is quite an early stage in the process. So as we move forward and applications move forward beyond validation and into risk assessment, obviously then the amount of resource that's required for each application increases. So we're very conscious of that. You asked about our approach to enforcement, and obviously, as we have done throughout this process, we work very closely with local authorities. We'll be providing them with additional information and guidance. And of course, when we publish our list of validated products, that will then be a key piece of information that they can then use to make their enforcement decisions. And we had a couple of questions about testing. And also at this point, I could perhaps pick up the question from Adam Shepherd that was put forward to the board at the beginning. There are a number of laboratories that are able to do CBD testing, but the FSA is also supporting work through a ring trial that's ongoing to look at how we can standardise the process. I don't know if Rick wants to add anything more on that, but we are absolutely supporting further standardisation, and industry will very much welcome that. And just to follow up on that initial question, Mr. Shepherd also asked about something called Article 4 in relation to hemp tea. Article 4 is a determination about whether a product is novel or not, and something like a tea made with the whole plant, hemp tea, with a long history of use would not be considered novel. We are thinking about whether it would be useful to provide more information about that, but we've got no current plans to do so. But obviously, we'll let our stakeholders in the industry know in very good time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Rick, do you want to come in very briefly on that point, and then I'll come to Emily on the other issues raised.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to add to what Rebecca just said, there is this ring trial that's ongoing. We're hoping to have the report from that test by the end of this month, I believe. There were a significant number of laboratories took part in that. I think it was 34 in total, which does include both international and national labs, and includes official control labs in the UK. So the hope is that we will have in the near future a standardised method that can be accredited, and then there will be that capacity to do the testing that people have talked about and asked about.
Thank you very much indeed. Emily, do you want to pick up the range of issues that have been raised? So our approach to salmonella, the local authority backlog, and the Trade and Agriculture Commission report, and training of officers in local government.
Yes, thank you for all those questions. Quite a range. Actually, I just wanted to add a couple of things on CBD just to supplement what Rebecca was saying, and Rick. So in terms of enforcement, which I seem to, can you hear me okay? Great. So on CBD, in terms of enforcement, in addition to working with local authorities, we'll also be working with retailers. Obviously, it's for the food business to make sure that they are being compliant. That is the primary responsibility in law. And then local authorities are there to as a backstop. So, for example, this afternoon, when Ruth and I go and talk to the British Retail Consortium and the technical directors of various food businesses there, we will be emphasising that this list of products that are validated applications will be available from the 1st of April, and we would be expecting retailers to take action And similarly, we will have a conversation with the online with online aggregators. And on resources, we were able, as you know, to secure a little bit of additional resource for our post-EU exit responsibilities from the Treasury, and some of that is going into recruiting additional scientific assessors. In fact, we're in a big recruitment at the moment, encourage scientists to apply. And some of the issues in the CBD applications are actually in common, so we can do one assessment of one particular aspect of the science, which is common to several applications. But I should also say that we have a higher volume of applications than we had anticipated, and the surge arrangements that Rebecca is describing have had to be activated quite quickly, so there was slightly more than we anticipated. On the Salmonella enteritidis and the chicken question, Colin can supplement more, but so the question was, are we comfortable we've done enough? Are there additional steps that we could take? So we have done a huge amount. We've done a number of recalls, a number of product withdrawals. We've also, with Public Health England, done whole genome sequencing and been able to trace what in effect is 2 outbreaks relating to over 480 people getting ill and 1 death, sadly, that is related from January. And that has been traced back to chicken coming from Poland, which is frozen and then used in these frozen products. Now we've issued health advice, cooking advice, to make it clear that if these products are cooked properly, so if you follow the instructions on the packet and cook them for the length of time required, that will kill the salmonella. So we suspect that these illnesses are coming from undercooked or underbaked products. So we'd emphasise that to consumers. But it's also our view that we should not be receiving chicken with salmonella in from Poland. So we have been in touch with the Polish authorities. DEFRA has written, myself and the Chief Veterinary Officer at DEFRA will also be writing again to ask for further action. So we're keeping that under very close review. Colin may want to say more on that. On so question about the Trade and Agriculture Commission. So we also think it's a good report, and in fact I was meeting yesterday with the director from Department for International Trade to talk about next steps. The government will do a response to that report, which will be a cross-departmental response, and that process, they're in the process now of coordinating that. I guess I had assumed, and you can advise me, that the FSA as a government department would feed into that government response. But if you would like the FSA to make a separate statement, that's something that we need to consider. The thing I would emphasise is that we have made a commitment to do an annual report on food standards, which obviously would include the standards relating to imported food. And we'll be bringing that proposition back to the board in the course of this year to explain how we plan to approach that report. And Food Standards Scotland will be part of that too. We want to do a joint annual assessment. So that in effect will be our main ongoing response to the Trade and Agriculture Commission's work, which is that we think there needs to be a sort of state of the nation on food standards done on a regular basis, and that would be our offering into the debate. And what else? We had, yes, the question about local authority capacity and the backlog. Actually, I would like, if possible, for us to talk about this tomorrow at the Business Committee. We have the performance report there, where we've got some data on what's going on with the food hygiene rating. What I would just say a couple of comments this morning. The first is that just in terms of the sorts of businesses that are popping up that Dave referred to, many of them we have ways of assessing risk, are incredibly low risk. So they may have a very small reach, very small number of customers, and products that are not at all risky. So for example, cakes as opposed to meat products. So I think we just need to put this in context of what the actual risk is to consumers out there, and not get too het up about what looks like a big backlog. So just be really specific about the facts. And second of all, it is obviously a completely unprecedented situation, what's happened with COVID. and it will take us time to work through and think what the right approach is. But we can say more about that tomorrow. And then Mark's question about the urgent need for officers in relation to additional requirements for that have arisen partly because of the transition period and partly because of COVID, and whether there was funding for them. So the answer to that is yes and no. So there are some additional posts, particularly at port health authorities, where the FSA has bid for and received money from the Treasury, where we've dispersed that to those port health authorities, and there are additional people that have been recruited. In relation to the COVID shortages, obviously there are specific pots of money the government has given to local authorities to deal with the COVID response. We don't have detail on the extent to which that is being spent on additional food officers, but we suspect it will be in some cases. So I hope that gives a bit of an answer.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily. I know Colin wants to come in. We'll take a quick comment from Colin, I think on the salmonella, and I think David wants to come back in. So Colin first.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Yes, just on those specific points, in terms of the two suppliers in Poland that these outbreaks have been traced to, one of the two suppliers, we already have a positive release procedure in place since December, and we've been taking a graduated response, working across government with different agencies. And as Emily says, we'll continue to be in contact with Polish authorities to gain assurances. And then in respect of the type of product, Margaret made reference to breaded chicken. I think the main point to make there is in relation to the fact that since December, the chicken that's been coming from Poland in this format has been thermally cooked. And there is, however, I should say, a concern that the product format does give rise from input from our social science colleagues in respect of how it will be cooked, so that if it's a raw fillet of chicken, the consumer will see the obvious need to cook it, but perhaps in the format of nuggets, breaded nuggets, it may not be seen as being needed to be cooked. But it's important, and we've made this point on a number of occasions for consumers to thoroughly cook the chicken involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dave, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I suppose it was just, if I may, just on the salmonella. I mean, it's encouraging that one of the two suppliers is on positive release, but I guess I'm a little surprised that the second one isn't. And I guess given we've had 480 cases, where does the trigger come that says, I'm really sorry, but we can't take this product from either these companies or this country until you can demonstrate that your products are going to be safe? I know in many instances we've seen in different scenarios where product from the UK has been suspended through animal welfare issues or whatever, and certainly if you have a product recall from a supermarket for an issue related to this kind of thing, they wouldn't be taking it back in the next day until you'd proven that you had a safe and clean supply chain. So what is the trigger for moving on to that next step of temporary prohibition?
Okay. I've got both Colin and Emily. Emily, do you want to comment first?
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasise that it's important that there is a piece of information missing at the moment that we would like, which is the pre-notification of products of animal origin and high-risk food of not of animal origin onto IPAFs, which is the DEFRA-owned import system from those products from EU countries. So until the end of December, we were part of RASIF, which was the Risk Alert food safety system, and we would have been able to get information about to some extent about those products through that system. But also there would not have been, and there haven't been, alerts coming to us about those products because they weren't crossing a border because of the single market. Now, it would be incredibly helpful for us to have those pre-notifications, and we're expecting that to come in very shortly, hopefully in the next couple of months. So that will help us then be much more targeted. So because we'll be able to spot particular consignments and say, right, that's one we want to sample more of as it crosses the border. In the meantime, we've been working very closely with the retailers who've been doing fantastic work to make sure that product is withdrawn or is safe. So they have been taking steps, but we would like to be able to do more there. But Colin perhaps could say a bit more from a trigger point of view.
Colin, over to you for the
yes, thanks
final
very
word
much.
on this.
I think Emily's covered most of it. Just the other point to add is the number of cases. We've had 480 cases since January of 2020, but in the last number of weeks, following the thermal cooking that occurred from December onwards, we're seeing the numbers reduce. So in the last few weeks, it's been 20 cases, then down to 7. And this last week, there was only the 1 case. So we do think we're getting on top of it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And thank you for the comprehensive questions on the Chief Exec's report. It's important that we do explore all the issues that we have this morning. Thank you. I'm going to move us on to our strategic papers and the annual report from the Science Council Chair, and to welcome Professor Sandy Thomas, Chair of the Science Council, and Professor Peter Gregory, who's a member of the Council. And Sandy, I think you're going to open up the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Ruth, and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to make what is my 4th report to the board. Before I start, I'd just like to thank you all for the continuing support of the Science Council and the really good relationship that I think we've built with FSA Science, the team, as it's reformed, the executive, of course, very pleased to be working with Emily, and also Robin and his team. So, that's all been going very well, and the support has really been excellent. They've really helped us focus on the key issues and be able to do work that is going to deliver, I think, practical and also timely advice. And just to remind everybody, before I get into the substance, that the annual report of the Science Council to the board is one of the papers of the meetings that you will have seen. So just to remind you that we've been in existence now for 4 years. During that time, we've provided this independent expert advice to the board and the CSA on the strategic use of science by the FSA. And I think that's a very important distinction, the strategic aspect, from the other science advisory committees that are there, with whom we have good relationships. Now, since we last met, when I reported annually in 2020, we've met twice ourselves in open session in June and December. We've also had several smaller meetings to guide our work and to report on progress. So, as for everybody, the last year has been challenging in terms of delivery, but I'll quickly summarise each piece of work and then just briefly look to the future. So I'm pleased to say that we completed our work on data usage and digital technology. It came to an end in August last year. This was Working Group 4. We started work in 2018, September, on this, and it was led by Professor Patrick Wolf, who is an international expert on data science and a member of the Science Council. And the specific question that the FSA asked us to look at was how the FSA can better understand the next phase of technology developments, recognising the future challenges and the opportunities, and having sufficient understanding to be able to ensure positive governance of the food system. And the first phase established how the FSA was doing, what kind of progress it was making, and the second commissioned research to look outwards at future trends and opportunities for data manipulation and utilisation. So the final recommendations you heard from us back in August. Professor Wolf and I came to that meeting, and those recommendations are summarised in the paper that accompanies this board meeting. So I think we're very pleased with the work that went into the review and the support received. I'd particularly like to mention Julie Pearce and her team, who really helped us formulate very practical and actionable advice on this. So really thanks to Julie and others too. And I do understand that in June we will receive from our Secretariat an update on the board's response, and I look forward to seeing that. Now, the next piece of work that I'd like to talk about that you've heard about recently is on food hypersensitivity. And this is, in many ways, our biggest and most challenging piece of work. We will deliver our final report and recommendations to you in June this year. And we started this in November 2019. And Paul Turner, he's an international expert and a Science Council member on food hypersensitivity. So we're very fortunate to have a member who's also an expert in this absolutely key area. Now, you asked us back in May 2019 to consider and advise on future research priorities and direction in respect of food hypersensitivity, and to conduct a review of the science and evidence base for addressing this and the part that FSA and others should play in enhancing knowledge. So this is quite a big piece of work, and we split it into 3 phases, looking back at what we can learn from the FAIR programme's work in the past on food allergy and intolerance, and best practice on how that science has influenced decision-making. Via a horizon scanning workshop in March. So Dr. Turner presented an interim report to you in September last year, and that included conclusions from the first phase. And as I said, this is one of the largest and most challenging pieces of work, but we think it's very worthwhile, and we really hope it'll make an important contribution. And then moving on, I just want to talk about the most recent piece of work that you've asked us to do. So last year, you asked us how the FSA should evaluate the robustness of evidence submitted by non-commissioned third parties in an effort to change our policy in order to ensure that the evidence that you consider to inform your advice and recommendations is sufficiently robust and based on the most up-to-date scientific information. So we started this work in September last year. It's our first rapid evidence review, and this is an approach we hope to use increasingly in the future. So the final outputs of this work, which you'll be seeing really quite soon, is a report outlining best practice and a set of high-level principles and guidelines for the assessment of evidence in the FSA. And I'd just like to invite Peter Gregory, Professor Peter Gregory, who I think is with us, who's a member of the Science Council and who's been leading on this work. Peter, you've got about a minute or two, I think, to say a few points. Thank you.
That's right. So I'm just going to briefly say how the work was conducted and the conclusions we've reached. So what we did, we've done 4 things, really. We've reviewed the existing national and international guidance and the frameworks that are available for assessing evidence from a whole range of bodies. We held a series of interviews with lead officials in the FSA and with Food Standards Scotland to understand what current practice is. We've drawn on the expertise of the various science advisory committees in the FSA and with other government departments. And then fourthly, we've used those findings to develop a framework for assessing evidence that's being submitted to the FSA. And to just jump from that to the conclusions, the first conclusion we reached was that there was no single checklist or grading system that would be fit for purpose, given the breadth of evidence that the FSA handles. So, for example, the way social scientists analyse evidence is quite different to the way, for example, that a crop production specialist, the sorts of detail that we go into. So having a single checklist would not be appropriate. Instead, what we've done is to develop a series of high-level principles and guidelines to support the assessment of evidence, leaving the detail to the specific specialisms. And these principles, finally, these principles and guidelines that we've developed reflect the best practice in the FSA and draw on key criteria in the various national and international guidance systems that are already in use. I think that's my minute.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. So under Peter's leadership and also with contributions from member Sarah O'Brien, this review has really made excellent progress in a very short time frame and very well supported by FSA staff. And we've already shared the early outputs with the executive management team, and we're looking forward to going to consultation on the principles and guidelines later this month. And we think that consultation with external stakeholders is really very important. And we hope to share all of this, the report, the principles, the guidelines, with the board later this year. So that's been a very important bit of work that we managed to do at fairly short notice. So having really covered our programme there, I just want to talk about a few of the risks and opportunities that we face going forward and our future direction. So as I mentioned earlier, we're diversifying the kind of review that we're doing. You will have seen over the years that we do these working groups. These are in-depth, longer pieces of work. And what we're doing now is we're still doing those, but we're diversifying so we can do shorter term and medium term pieces of work. And the example of the evidence review was one of the short pieces of work. And we think this will allow us to be more agile, more responsive when necessary, so we can deliver really focused reviews when the issue is time sensitive. So I think this is going quite well. We're also recruiting a couple of new members. We're very pleased about that. And this will enable us to widen our range of expertise and also increase our capacity as we think about new challenges. So just looking ahead on those new challenges, just wanted to give you a bit of an insight into the work that we'll be taking on over this year. So we're going to undertake a short review of the application of other legitimate factors, which I heard you mention earlier. And this is going to build on the review that's been undertaken by the ACSS, Assurance Working Group. And then a new piece of work is going to look at the potential food safety implications of changes to meet net zero carbon targets by 2050. We expect to start this about the middle of the year, and we'll scope it in consultation with a wide range of external stakeholders, including government, to make sure that it provides a meaningful and a really focused assessment of the topic that's absolutely relevant to what the FSA is doing. And then finally, we are going to undertake a broad review of the risks and the issues of a changing food system in the context of COVID-19, but also a post-EU exit world. And this is likely to take the form largely of a horizon scanning workshop, and that will be done later in this year or early next. So just drawing to a conclusion now, I'd just like to say how I've described our progress. I haven't really mentioned how, like yourselves, we've all had to work completely differently, and the remote working has changed how we've had to do these projects. But what has actually been really quite surprising, and I'm pleased about this, is that people have adapted very quickly. And obviously we've lost quite a bit in terms of the face-to-face contact, but the Secretariat have come up with logistical and technological ideas to help us even run stakeholder workshops remotely, which while they're not as dynamic and you don't get the conversation, the margins, it does mean we've had the participation of people who might not have been able to have taken part in a physical meeting. But of course, we're looking forward to the latter and hope that we'll be able to meet in person again before too long. So we're planning these reviews that I've just described to you. We're always, I think, very alive to other possibilities as they crop up. And I think the rapid evidence reviews should provide some assurance to the board that we are in a position to really respond quickly, as well as do the deeper pieces of work. So I feel enthusiastic about the coming year. I think we'll continue to focus on providing this high-level expert strategic insight, expert challenge and advice on the use of science to help you deliver your objectives towards providing a safe food system. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sandy, and also Peter. As ever, fantastic contribution from yourselves and other members of the Science Council. I think we are hugely indebted to the quality and the scope of the work that you're taking on at the moment. And indeed, as you say, in the time of a pandemic, it's been remarkable. You've made so much progress on so many of the issues. And I'm pleased to hear that the FSA Secretariat are supporting you effectively. I'll turn to Robin, see if Robin wants to add anything to the report, and then I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, very briefly from me, just two things really. One, I think, is in terms of the specific third-party evidence that was presented by Sandy and Peter just now. To me, this has been a exceptionally useful piece of work. I've seen it's already being moved into some operational guidelines by colleagues in the FSA. And I think a really excellent example of how you can balance, as Peter mentioned, these really very different types of evidence, while still ensuring that they are kind of equally robust. So that's been great. In terms of the future projects, absolutely. I mean, it's great to see this mixture of the very tight and kind of focused and the big picture things such as the net zero, the impact of net zero, which I think offers a great sort of future proofing and a horizon scanning function for the FSA. And lastly, really just to acknowledge my thanks to Sandy, Peter and the rest of Science Council. As the board will know, I've been in post now for about 8 months, and it has been an absolute delight to work with them. The way the interaction works, the kind of the counterbalance of views and that sort of level of science assurance is really fabulous. So many thanks, and that's it from my end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'm particularly pleased with the third-party assurance work. I think the test for us will be how we evaluate its use and modify and develop it after the consultation process. So very great, thanks for that. I've got a question from Timothy.
Hi, thanks for that. Really enjoyed the presentation and thanks for that, Sandy. I was really interested in the zero carbon aspect, obviously still within the context and remit of the food standards. And I was just wondering whether or not, it may be early days, whether or not the broader economics will be part of that review, just looking at the economic scope and impact on production and supply chain, because obviously these have feedback into what actually happens in terms of food production and also the choices that one makes. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. I think we've got a question from Peter as well. So we'll take that one and then come back to you, Sandy and Peter.
Okay. Sorry, did you want me to respond to that one now?
Sorry, I'll take Peter Price's comment as well, and then we can comment on both. Peter?
It was about the net zero carbon horizon scanning. And specifically, will you be taking into account as a distinct group the small businesses that may be affected? Because that could be a different effect than the very large companies who are able to cope with this in a very different way.
Thank you, Peter. Sandy, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Well, those are two really good questions. And I have to emphasise that we are at a really early stage. We haven't even seen a scoping document yet. In fact, we have a meeting this week of the Science Council to discuss this topic properly for the first time. And the Secretariat has done an outline document. I mean, those two dimensions that you mentioned are really important. Taking the SMEs first, clearly that's a very important food part of the food sector, and who are likely to be affected by the economic dimension that we heard about as well. So both very important, and I think they'll definitely be on the table in terms of the areas that this project is going to look at. But I think the important thing is to keep in close touch with the board and with Robin on this very important topic, so that we can, any ideas that you have or any inputs that people would like to make in terms of the scope could be considered by the Science Council. But personally speaking, at this stage, those are both very important dimensions that I can't imagine we would exclude. I mean, obviously, they're interrelated, of course. So yes, I would be confident that they will be addressed.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And Tim's comments, did you want to reference Tim's question?
That was the one, was that the one on the SMEs?
That's Peter's, yes.
Okay. Well, I think just as I mentioned with the SMEs, I think that obviously here we're often talking about very narrow business margins, and it's difficult for companies to be able to invest in new infrastructure or meet new kinds of charges, whether this could be through some kind of carbon charges or whatever. And so I think there will be a need to really assess this very carefully, both in terms of the overall safety, because you will need compliance as regulations are likely to change. But there'll also need to be a real assessment of the vulnerability of businesses, and there'll be an enforcement question as well. Is this going to lead to another dimension of enforcement? But I think that's all I'll say for now, because I don't want to preempt the discussion we're having this week.
Okay, thank you. I've got Robin wants to come back in. I think we'll conclude there. Robin.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, just very briefly to say, to follow up on Timothy and Peter's questions about the kind of juncture there. I mean, obviously achieving net zero is a huge project in terms of food. And I know that DEFRA and other colleagues are looking very closely at things like land management and crop changes. So I think from an FSA perspective, if we're kind of more placed to the consumer end, I see my own role obviously is very important in terms of exchanging that information with, for example, chief scientists at DEFRA and other colleagues. And so we'll make sure those communication lines are really open so that we cover both ends of the food system and don't leave kind of stones unturned, but also don't duplicate effort.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Sandy and Peter, for coming this morning and for all the work you've done and for presenting the paper. It's much appreciated. And you can see how important this is for us as a board going forward. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the EU transition update. And I think we've got Rebecca Sudworth, Anthony Janager and Theo Hawkins who are going to cover this paper. And Rebecca, you're going to start off.
That's right. Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I'll just say a few words in introduction. As Emily noted in her opening remarks, this has been a huge programme of work for the FSA. I'd just like to thank the team and everybody who's been working on it. So, as you know, all of our FSA-led preparations were delivered on time for the 1st of January and the end of the transition period. And our focus is now on working with DEFRA, colleagues across government, stakeholders from all sectors of industry on the implementation. And as you're aware, and as is outlined in the paper, there is phased introduction of some aspects going forward, particularly around border controls. We're also looking at our own internal ways of working, ensuring that our work here in the FSA is moving to business as usual where appropriate. A good example of that is obviously our risk analysis process we've been talking about, and ensuring that we have the right resources and skills in place. And I'm grateful for the board's interest in that as well. I just wanted to emphasise a couple of things. It's important to emphasise that we continue to support businesses to understand and work within this new environment, and we're putting a huge amount of effort and resource into that. Very extensive engagement through our own networks and different stakeholder forums, but also with DEFRA and across government. And that extends, as we discussed earlier, to businesses in Northern Ireland and the implications of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And we're also pleased that our incidents notification systems are working well. There's information in the paper about all that involves. No evidence that there's been increased risk as a specific result of the end of the transition period. And as outlined in the paper, we're going to continue developing our capacity in this area, and we have a programme of work leading development of the InfoSam network, including plans for the UK to host a global event this year. So, as I've said, this is a very full paper, and I'd be very pleased to take any comments or questions. And we have colleagues Anjali Janeja and Theo Hawkins with us as well, and they can perhaps pick up some of the more detailed points if necessary. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to underline the huge amount of work that has taken place in your team and across the FSA in managing this transition period. And it's testament to everyone where we've got to in terms of completing so many parts of the programmes that we set out to achieve. So just a huge congratulations to you on that. And obviously a bit more work to go still. But any comments or questions from the board? So I've got Mark, Margaret and Coleman. We take all three and then we'll come back to you, Rebecca. So Mark.
Thank you, Ruth. And yeah, just to start by echoing your comments, if I may, there is clearly been a massive amount of work getting ready for the position we're now in, and just wanted to show my appreciation for all of that work that's been undertaken. My two questions relate to importing food. The first one is there's a comment in the report about no new food safety risks on EU food imports being recognised. I just wonder if there's any update on the situation we've discussed before around transit goods. Obviously, we're a couple of months in now. I'd be interested to know whether transit goods coming into the EU, not being cleared by the EU because they're destined for the UK, represent any kind of risk to the UK markets. And my other question is about preparedness for the situation on the 1st of July when effectively the full scale of import checks should be implemented, and what our contingency plans are for if the infrastructure is not ready at that stage. I've read reports recently about concerns in Portsmouth and in terms of one of the sites in Kent, which is not likely to be ready, I'm told, until April 2022. So just wonder what our contingency plans are for delivering those import checks if the infrastructure isn't ready.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think we've got Margaret next.
Same areas of questioning, and repeat, this is a fascinating paper and so much going on, and you identify some really tough challenges and seem to be mitigating well. I know how exhausted people from inside and outside the FSA are. And I wonder whether we should be concerned that we're very much getting caught up in the logistics of trying to make it all work instead of, really focusing on getting back to food safety, and food inspections and what have you. I'm thinking things like concentration on export certificates over and how much time that is taking up. When we keep raising concerns about inspection regimes and how much we can do to help LAs recover from the COVID effect, and also whether we're putting enough time right now in making sure that we exploit the positives that have come out of COVID, that we are looking at things like, was some of the remote working more effective and should we be jumping on that, or are we just getting sort of slightly pulled aside? And then without at all wanting to draw you into the whole politics of it all, I just wonder, we keep getting these grace periods, whether they're simply, in your view, going to be pushing problems down the road, or can we hope that they will in fact leave us with different procedures that might actually be quite helpful?
Thank you very much, Margaret. And we'll take Colm and then come back to you.
Sure, thank you very much. And Rebecca, thank you for the paper and the presentation, and most of all for all of the work that's been done over the past 12 or 18 months to get. I think it's phenomenal that we've actually got to where we are in all of this in the most difficult of situations. We did have a good discussion last week at the NIFAC discussion on this. You'll be delighted to hear that most of the questions were deemed to be far too political to expect you to answer them because they're in our own little bailiwicks. We're not going to ask you to do that. But just in terms of the continued implementation, and we are extending the grace periods a little bit, and albeit that might be difficult in terms of discussions between the UK and the EU, that will continue, but eventually that will have to run out. And I suppose my question is, how geared up are we in the FSA in supporting our colleagues in local government in Northern Ireland and for the day whenever those that we do come to some sort of an end and get full implementation of the protocol? assuming that happens at some stage before the end of this calendar year.
Thank you very much for the questions. Rebecca, do you want to come back in? I see Emily wants to comment, but Rebecca, do you want to kick off and I'll come back to Emily?
Yeah, I wanted just to say a couple of things about some of the points that have been raised, which is similar, particularly around grace periods, readiness for full implementation, and maybe slightly to reverse the order. So, Margaret, you asked about grace periods and whether they were an issue, if you like, in extending the period before which full implementation would be in place. So I think they're a very well accepted and useful tool. Obviously, they need to be by agreement of both parties, but obviously we're starting in all of this. The context that we need to remember is that we're starting with essentially the same systems in place in Europe and in the United Kingdom. We've been part of the same systems for many years, and we do have a good deal of trust and confidence, obviously mutually, on how those systems keep food safe. And I think that the arrangements for grace periods of various kinds are very sensible, and I know supported by industry. Obviously, as Colm and others have identified, then the challenge is to move forward to full compliance. And obviously, we work very closely with colleagues across government, with business and industry. And we pride ourselves in the FSA on our open and transparent approach. And we work very hard to make sure that our information is up to date, so that businesses have a trusted source of information about what's required. And we're also honest about what we don't know. Colm, you've acknowledged that some of the decisions and discussions going on at the moment are highly political. And obviously we have to work within that environment as well. And we're always clear with our stakeholders about that. I think maybe Emily probably wanted to make some similar strategic points, and then we can perhaps pick up some of the more specific questions. And again, if I've missed any of them, then please do let me know.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Over to you.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up Margaret's question. Actually, Margaret, as I understand it, I think what you're saying is, is the FSA sort of having to put way too much of its resource into dealing with the EU exit and COVID issues and not focusing on sufficiently on what's happening domestically with local authorities? Is that, have I understood that right? Yeah, great. So I had a couple of things I wanted to say in response to that. The first is that the question about imported food and safety of imported food is our work. That is part and parcel of the FSA's job, to make sure that food coming into the country is safe and is what it says it is for the consumer. So the work that we're doing on EU exit has largely been around thinking about the border controls, the imports. We are doing a little bit of support, as you know, on export health certificates, and offering some support to DEFRA. But actually, it's not massive. And it's tailed off. It was a few weeks of support. It's pretty stable at the moment, and Colin could say a little bit more about that. Perhaps, in fact, tomorrow might be the time for us to pick that up, because it's more of an operational matter, so a bit more internal. But so imported food is our work, and keeping it safe. The second thing is, it feels to me like there was a horizon issue as we were running up to the end of December, where it was very hard to look over the edge of that and go, right, what is life going to be like for the FSA in our work going forward? We've got over that now, and we've had 2 months of running the new system and getting used to the new arrangements. There's still more to come, because grace periods will end and additional import controls will come in over the course of this year. But we're starting to get the look and feel of what it's like to be operating in the new world. And I think we still have a bit more work to really get clear for ourselves what the big opportunities are and where we need to put our energy and effort next. And I am comfortable with the fact that the last couple of months we have been more in reactive mode. We've been trying to get these new systems and so on in place. And then we need to take a bit of time to take stock. We have an opportunity tomorrow, again, to talk about the forward plan for the FSA's business next year. And you can judge whether we've put the right eggs in the right baskets for next year and whether we've got the balance right. The following year, I think we will have a much stronger sense of where these opportunities are for us in this new regime, particularly for the England and Welsh jurisdictions. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that what is facilitating this is that in our settlement from the Treasury, we had in the main, the ring fence around the EU exit money lifted. So it was 14.6 million that was ring fenced just to spend on the consequences of EU exit. And from the end of March this year, that just becomes part of our ordinary budget. So if we choose and we want to put more resource and effort into other things and we think that EU exit related issues that we previously had been funding are sufficiently covered, and we do have a little bit more flex than we had before. So I'm feeling reassured in that way.
Thank you very much for that, Emily. Are there any other comments from board members before I come back to Rebecca for the final word? No? So any other final points, Rebecca, from you?
We had one question from Mark that we've not picked up actually on transit goods. So this is Mark. So this is where goods that are coming into the EU, which are destined to go onwards to the United Kingdom, are therefore not checked at the EU border. Is that yeah, exactly. So and I think so going back to something Emily says earlier, this is why it's very important for the FSA that as planned we do get pre-notification of food and feed that is going to be of higher risk, so that we know exactly what's coming in, and then we can take the decision about the appropriate risk management once it arrives in the United Kingdom. So that is going to be very important for us.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. There aren't any other comments. Thank you for those answers. And I should just formally say that we have noted the developments on a number of EU transition projects since the 2nd of December 2020 paper. Agreed the steps being taken are appropriate to manage the key outstanding challenges and risks under the programme. Note the ongoing activities for the EU transition programme, and note the wider regulatory changes happening that will have an impact on the FSA's work and activities going forward. And if we're all content with that, we will conclude there. Yes, it looks like we are. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, again, for all the work you've done on this programme. So we're due a comfort break. We are 10 minutes behind. I suggest we do take a quick comfort break. We will aim to finish at 12 as advertised. It's now 10:57. I suggest we reconvene at 11:10. Thank you.
Welcome back to the FSA board meeting. We're now going to consider a strategic risk management paper, and I'm pleased to invite Chris Hitchen, Director of Finance and Performance, to present the paper. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the third annual report to board members on strategic risk management. I'm going to take the paper as read, but just highlight a few areas for consideration in particular. So page 1 effectively refers to the FSA's approach to strategic risk management, and the paper captures the key themes from the board's annual risk workshop that was held in January. It then goes on to talk about the FSA's purpose being in risk management, and risk management being core to everything the FSA does. There's a couple of things that are new for this year that I just wanted to draw out. So paragraphs 2.4 through to 2.9, they cover the impact of COVID on the FSA and capture the fact that throughout the pandemic, the FSA has been very, very focused on balancing the food safety management alongside ensuring supply of food. The other thing that's changed in 2.6 is the UK has left the EU, and that has very much affected how the FSA approaches and how it delivers risk management, and its role in the global food system, which is outlined in 2.9. In terms of some of the things that are the same, so as I've mentioned, the FSA's responsibilities remain in managing risk in the food system, and 2.10 refers to, in particular, the role of the NFCU and how we're still seeking the PACE powers that will allow us to further improve our risk management in that area. So the final aspect to bring out is again on the change programmes, which are in paragraphs 216, 217 and 219. So first of all, there's ABC and Ops transformation, and those programmes are aiming to reform the way in which we regulate to be more risk focused. And 2.19 on the food hypersensitivity programme, which we've already heard something about earlier, which aims to improve our way of risk management for people with food hypersensitivities. That's all I wanted to say by introduction, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. So the board's asked to comment on the FSA's current approach to risk management, our latest assessment of potential concerns in the food system, and particularly whether there are opportunities and an appetite for the FSA to more effectively manage the inherent food system risks. So open to comments from board members. Who wants to comment? Can't. I've got Colm and then Emily. So Colm, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Chris, for the paper. I'm just wondering in terms of, and the Chair just referenced the risk appetite, but we did discuss this a little at the NIFAC last week, and one of the comments made was that the paper was silent on where we are on risk appetite. I suppose the other thing for me, just in going through at our recent discussions around risk management in January, it struck me that there were a greater number of risks identified within the risk register than those are, and I'm assuming you have sort of corralled a few of the risks into areas rather than articulate all of the risks. The other point that was made, just and this is a very Northern Ireland thing, as you would expect, but I think there was probably a little bit of surprise from the NIFAC members that the Northern Ireland Protocol wasn't specifically mentioned as a risk in itself. I probably know the answer to that, but I'd be keen to hear from yourself, Chris. Thank you.
I've got Mark as well, so I'll take Mark's comments and then I'll come to Emily and then back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Ruth. One of my comments is quite specific, really, and relates to in 2.11, Chris, you talk about the surveillance strategy and food and feed sampling being informed by intelligence. And I just wonder, actually, I'm always slightly nervous when I see that in terms of a surveillance strategy, because my experience is that when you lead everything by intelligence in a surveillance strategy, you end up confirming what you already know, and you don't end up finding the things that you don't know. And in a surveillance strategy, I would be looking to have a plan to try and identify the things that we don't know, as well as confirming what we perhaps might suspect. I'm not sure I've articulated that very well. My other question relates to the OTP and the transformational change in terms of that. Looking forward to hearing some more detail about how that's going, but I'm just interested to know, as that's all about regulation as well, whether we've mapped the changes that are proposed in that with the kind of work that we're doing in the ABC programme as well, so that we're trying to effectively regulate in the same way, both in terms of what we do directly and what we do through partners.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'll pick up Emily, I think, then we'll go back to Chris, and I think Margaret wants to come in then. So Emily next.
Great, thank you. I'll leave Chris to pick up Colm's questions on risk appetite. The risk appetite point is very important to us as the executive because it's the steer the board gives us. And in fact, we'll discuss tomorrow the way that we've taken a steer from you that you want us to take a little bit more risk with our budget. So that's that will come up tomorrow. I wanted to talk about the operational transformation programme briefly, as Mark has just referred to it. We had been hoping to bring some papers this morning that would give a bit more detail to the board and to our stakeholders and the public about where we're at with this. And we weren't able to get those papers ready in time. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the government clearances that we needed in time. And I'm conscious there's quite a lot of people, particularly in the meat industry, who are waiting to see what we want to set out, and that is eagerly wanted. I just wanted to be really clear with everyone that the reason for the delay is not because of any issues around our ambition or direction of travel. It was simply just about timing. And our commitment to the principles of the programme remain steadfast. So and this is about making sure that we protect consumer trust, that food safety is at the centre, but that also we take a more proportionate approach to our use of resource. I've heard, having spoken to a couple of particularly small abattoir stakeholders in the last week, that people are sort of waiting to find out what we're going to say because it may inform their business decisions. I just want to be really clear that the next step for us is to set out quite a high level set of principles about the way the programme is going to operate, and that very granular detail, which I think people are waiting for, is some months away. So I wouldn't want people to confuse what we're expecting to publish soon with that very specific detail that will come. To go to Mark's question about the relationship between the Achieving Business Compliance programme, which is about the work that we want to do with local authorities about regulating businesses out there, and then our operational transformation programme, which is the work that we do internally in the FSA about meat hygiene inspection and dairy and wine inspection. So there are some that they used to be in the same programme. Actually, we're treating them as separate programmes now, but they have a huge amount in common. And we have a portfolio office in the centre of the FSA that makes sure that the dependencies and the relationships are overseen and that there is consistency. So, for example, one of the principles that we want to use in both is a segmentation approach, where we're taking segments of the food industry or segments of the meat industry and applying a different approach depending on the type of business. We also want to have more of a sort of what I call earned autonomy, where the more compliant businesses are faced with less intrusive inspection and more expectation that they will do more themselves, because we need food businesses to take more responsibility, and that will also apply in the Achieving Business Compliance programme. So, and then the third thing that's deeply in common is that they are data driven, and those judgments about who is compliant and where the risk is will be informed by very thoughtful analysis that's data driven. So I just wanted to reassure Mark that will be there, and we hope to come back to this very soon with you as a board.
Very much. Chris, do you want to pick up the other points about risk?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just going back to Colin's questions about the good point about the risk appetite and whether that's properly captured in the paper. And you are right, Colin, this isn't intended to go into the detail of the actual discussion. What I can say, however, is that I'm confident that we've fully captured the board's risk appetite on a full range of items that was discussed in that retreat. And just to reinforce what Emily said there, that is particularly helpful when the executive discuss and come across key issues in that we are gauging the board's risk appetite in response to those. Just following up on the question about the Northern Ireland Protocol, obviously we've just discussed EU exit in a former paper, and I think Colin was anticipating I would probably respond by saying that specific Northern Ireland Protocol risk would be managed within that programme, and we do have that risk captured in the papers elsewhere.
Thank you, Chris. I've got Julie, Margaret, and then Colm. So, Julie, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on Mark's point about surveillance and sampling, I think maybe what we've got there in 211 maybe wasn't clear or explicit enough. What we're doing is applying more intelligence-led approach to our sampling programme than we had in the past. So that's more rather than exclusively. We are also developing through an insight into understanding what is really going on, where it's clear as to what we need to do. We have the intelligence. We also know about known unknowns, and how do we address those, and also conceptually there are the unknown unknowns as well. So all of those are being considered and planned in. It's not as if we've moved only to purely an intelligence-led approach, if that's reassurance. It's in development, and I'm very happy to provide more briefing as it starts to emerge.
Thanks, Julie. I'm sure we can follow that up. Margaret.
Thank you. You've addressed most of the ops transformation programme stuff I was concerned about. Obviously very disappointing, and hope that and take on board your assurances that it's still on track. I think that's important. And then my other question was about lessons learned from COVID and where we are on that, how that's going to feed into our risk analysis and management.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm sure Emily and/or Colin Sullivan may want to say more on this. Colin's obviously been the lead for the COVID incident on behalf of the FSA. But as a member of SRG, we have been very focused on lessons learned, even to the point where there have been some lessons and learnings that we've picked up on very early and have allowed us to accelerate some of our work programs, where in fact we think in the long term we can actually use some of the things we've done differently. But I don't know if Emily and Colin wanted to say more on that.
Got Emily coming in.
Thank you. Yeah. So on that, one of the consequences, for instance, from our COVID work was we set up very rapidly last April a sort of short-term horizon scanning function that could look very immediately at what was going on in the food industry and for consumers on food. So we did an extra consumer tracker. We had a panel of experts that we were consulting every couple of weeks and so on. So we now have those mechanisms in place, and that enables us to be much more able to be responsive to what's going on in terms of the risk environment. We're also doing more on the horizon scanning for the longer term. So I think, if anything, COVID has helped us strengthen that capability in the organisation. I do feel comfortable about that. I also just wanted to pick up, Margaret, you said that I've reassured you that we're on track on the Operations Transformation Programme. We're not, because we were hoping to bring that paper to the board and we had a timescale that was reliant on that key point. So we are now 2 to 3 months behind where we wanted to be. What we are on track with is the ambition of the programme and the changes that we expect to make. But I didn't want to let that pass and say that we were sticking to the timetables that we had said, because we haven't.
Thanks for that clarification. Colin, do you want to come in? And I've got Colm and Margaret.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Emily said in respect of the timings around ops transformation, but to say that whilst all the approvals weren't in place to allow the paper to come to the March board, that in that engagement we got no sense that what we were proposing wasn't in the right place, in the right space. And then in terms of lessons learned, Chris has mentioned the fact that as part of the COVID incident response, we have undertaken 2 lengthy and detailed lessons learned activities. For the first wave, we reported in August, and then subsequently over the winter plan period, and those lessons learned are now being incorporated into future actions.
Thank you for that. I think I've got Colm want to come back in.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just very quickly, thank you, Chris, for the responses. And I would just maybe refer back to Mark's question and Emily's point. I completely agree of the synergies between the two. And if you look at paragraph 221 of Chris's paper, and you look at the 3 other areas apart from EU transition that are sort of big strategic objectives, the ABC and OTP are actually quite closely related, and we need to get the synergies that are there. They're not entirely certainly from Northern Ireland perspective, they're not entirely unrelated from EU exit either, and all of the work around the protocol and the additional pressures on local authority there. So I suppose, encouraged by what Emily said, but I suppose, let's get a move on as quickly as possible as we can with all of this. It is really important that we move forward as quickly as possible with ABC and with OTP and really get the learning from each across each other, because they do have an ongoing impact into some of the EU exit work as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Colm. Chris, do you want to say any final words, or just accept that feedback?
Just to reinforce what Colin has said, we're very conscious about the strong links between ABC and ops transformation, and continue to approach it, albeit in terms of two separate programs, they're very closely linked.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for presenting the paper, and the team for the responses. And we note the paper as agreed, and accept the comments that we've made on that. Right, we're going to move on to the report of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, and I'm going to invite Colm to present.
Chair, thank you. And this is where I help you to make up time by not saying very much about it. I take the paper as read. We had 2 meetings of our ACT since our last board meeting in the middle of January, 19th of January. Traditionally, we meet to discuss the internal audit assurance plans for the coming year. And we give some useful feedback to the head of audit assurance, so he was able to change that plan and bring it back to us for the formal meeting on the 24th of February. At that meeting, we considered a number of issues, particularly around the Information Security Annual Report, and that report, as I understand, will be given to the full board at the June board meeting. We looked, as it is this time of the year, at the early work on the annual report and accounts, the planning and timetables around that, and the draft governance statement, and the audit assurance progress reports as well. And we just made some brief reference towards the end of the meeting to the deep dives that Chair, you and I and the previous Chair were involved in, and Emily and I had some discussions around that, and we'll implement those over the course of 21-2 in line with the executive responsibilities, because it will require some input from the executive team. So they already have a lot to do, so we not put too much additional burden on Emily, but I think a lot of the deep dives will add value to what the executive team are trying to do. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Colm. Any comments, questions from the board? No, I think that's taken as read. And now that I've stepped aside from ARAC, I can thank you very much for the work that you're doing on ARAC, and very much appreciated. No, I don't think there's any other comments, so we'll accept your...
You'll be very welcome back, Chair, whenever you no longer Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I look forward to it. Right, thank you for that. We'll accept that report. And whilst you've got the floor, Colm, would you like to report from the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee?
Sure, Chair. And again, briefly, we've met twice since the last board meeting. We had an open session on the 12th of January where we had a very good discussion around food poverty and the issues of food poverty, and particularly the impact that COVID has had on increasing food poverty, but some really uplifting examples of how that's being addressed in Northern Ireland. We met again on the 2nd and discuss the board papers for today's session, and I've had some of the thoughts in there. We've also been through quite a bit of a recruitment campaign since the last board meeting, where we sort of opened and closed the competition, had interviews late January, made recommendations through yourself to Minister for Health for Northern Ireland, and he moved very quickly, in fairness to Minister Swans. We have 3 new members starting on the 1st of April, and a 4th new member starting, I think it's on the 1st of July or the 1st of August in the summer, to coincide with Dr. Mitchell finishing. So we have 3 members finishing, 3 new members starting, so we'll have that continuity going forward. The future look, we have an open meeting established for the 3rd week in April, and again, that will continue to be remote. Obviously, we look at the food and new work, and we also have a discussion with Michelle Sherlow of Food NI, and really just get a sense as to where the food businesses in Northern Ireland are, particularly in relation to COVID and to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the issues that are affecting at the front line. And then I met with Chair and Peter last week just to look at the forward programme, and in addition to that, later in the year in Northern Ireland, we're going to look at food hypersensitivity in a bit more detail and at AMR. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Colm, for all the work you're doing. Peter?
Well, first of all, good news about the appointment of new members. We had a very good response of high-quality candidates, and the top 4 that emerged have now been notified by the Minister that they're being appointed, and later this week that will be publicly released. And I'm very glad to note that among the 4, that we have 2 women, 2 men, and one of those is a first language Welsh speaker. And so that kind of balance is good, but they were very high quality candidates. We're having an induction meeting for them on the 8th of April, and then they will be able to meet and hear from the officials as well as having an introduction from me. We met as a committee on the 4th of March last week to consider the board papers today. Generally, we found them reassuring, but of course set in an atmosphere, a context of uncertainty in so many different directions. The committee met previously on the 4th of February when we had a public discussion then of the Welsh food landscape. And looking at the whole field, there were a number of country-specific matters that came out of that. One was about Welsh seafood and concerns around that. The first is about delays at ports, which is causing trouble on a product that, of course, has a relatively short shelf life. And the second thing is that mussel beds in Wales are not being inspected because local authority officials are being diverted onto track and trace work to do with COVID. Another concern raised was about the resourcing of border control posts and all sorts of issues around that, which is still in a state of uncertainty. A lot of the law in this field, of course, is devolved, and the framework agreements are a matter of concern, what degree of consistent approach there will be, and also on the timing to complete them before the elections. And that's as yet still a concern. And the last point is about sustainable funding for local authorities in Wales. And I lay the emphasis on the word sustainable over time because the pressures on local authority financing are going to be considerable, and we were very concerned about that. And sorry, there is one more, and that is picking up also on what Colin said a moment ago, that his committee had been looking at the question of food poverty, and we were also flagging up as a concern and something that we want the agency to be concerned about in the future, as we have in the past indeed, safe and affordable food. And that's something that we will be considering to keep a close eye, continuing to keep a close eye on in the future. We are concerned about that angle. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you for the comprehensive reports and for the work that you're doing. And I know many of the points that you've fed back are played into the executive and help to inform the work across the whole agency. So it's really appreciated that you're spending the time giving us that rich picture of the issues specific to Wales and Northern Ireland. So thank you for that. And I also delighted that you've got so many new members between you. And I look forward to the day when I can say hello to them, and the days when we can return to visiting stakeholders in Wales and Northern Ireland. So hopefully it won't be too long before we can get back to some business as usual in that regard. Does any questions or comments on any of the feedback from the food advisory committees? No, okay. Thank you very much. I think that takes us to any other business. So I have two items, as I indicated. First of all, the board meeting dates for 2022 are now published. The dates are Wednesday, the 9th of March, 22, 15th of June, 14th of September and the 7th of December of 2022. It seems a long way off, but it will soon be here. And obviously the venues will be confirmed as and when we are back to usual routines. So my final any other business is sadly to say that we have to say goodbye to David Brooks. David, thank you so much. This is your last formal board meeting, and you come to the end of your tenure at the end of March this year, having served, I think, since April 2016. So one of our longest standing members of this board. And I'm sure colleagues will want to join me in thanking Dave for his exceptional contribution to the Food Standards Agency. Dave, your extensive knowledge of the food industry and your ability to ask the right questions has been immensely valuable to us as a board. You have rightly encouraged us to be innovative and progressive in shaping the regulatory system. So I want to thank you again for your interest, your wisdom, your energy, and your commitment to shaping that regulatory future. You will be missed. However, you're not quite finished yet, because we expect to see you back tomorrow for the business committee. So we'll look forward to enjoying your contribution through to the end of March. But I did want to put it on record today just how much I've really appreciated your contribution. I'm sure the board would endorse that. Yes, I'm seeing lots of nods. So thank you very much. And it's such a pity that we can't say thank you in person, but hopefully one day we might. I see Emily has got a hand up.
Thank you. I wanted to just say the same thing on behalf of the executive. We do this process in the open, and I don't know if people realise, but we don't know what's coming in terms of the questions that the board ask. And when Dave starts to ask his questions, I always slightly brace myself, because he asks very difficult and penetrating questions. And I think we are going to miss it enormously. I think you've kept us on our toes. And I think that's absolutely what the board should be doing. So just huge thanks. And good luck with what comes next, but you will be sorely missed here.
Thank you, Emily. Absolutely echo that. David?
Just if I may respond, thank you both for your very kind words. And I suppose thank you enormously to the Food Standards Agency, because I feel as I kind of owe the organisation a great debt. It's fairly well known, I think, that I was reluctant to apply for a publicly funded role back in 2012. I think I was first approached, and then again in 2015. But I'm so delighted that I did. I was kind of one of those typical corporate guys that just kind of thought, oh, public sector, blah, blah. But actually, the role at the FSA has given me a whole new perspective on the food industry, which 20 years of running a food business doesn't give you. And it also encouraged me to take on other publicly funded roles. And actually, what you realise when you do those activities is just the great breadth of additional experience that you gain as an individual from the people you meet, the environments that you work in, and understanding the different pressures that those organisations operate within. I was chatting to Robin last week, and it just kind of occurred to me, I really feel like over the last 5 years with the FSA and the other roles that I've undertaken, I've kind of been lucky enough to do an MBA and been paid for it rather than having to pay for it, because of, say, that breadth and exposure that it gives. I would thoroughly encourage anyone who was a bit like me in 2015 thinking, why would I want to do that, to bloody well do it, frankly, because it will give you might think you're giving back, but actually you end up taking out huge more than you give back to the organisation in that level of experience you gain. It's been a fantastic experience. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm thoroughly disappointed to have to come to the end of my tenure, but I was lucky to get 2 terms, wasn't I? So I should be grateful for that as well. I wish you all well. I thank you all, and I will see you tomorrow.
Good. I'm glad you're coming back tomorrow. Thank you for those fantastic words, Dave, and great testament to encourage others to participate in public service. So thank you. Lots of applause there for you. So really appreciate it. And so, yes, we will be back tomorrow. Business committee from 9:30 on Zoom. And then the next formal board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 16th of June. And subject to the COVID-19 roadmap, we will be informing you at some point as to how and where that will take place. But otherwise, we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed, everyone.
Thank you, Ruth.